I always knew I was the family scapegoat, but I never thought they'd actually tell me to disappear. My name is Jennifer, and for 28 years, I've been the designated problem in my family. Every argument, every financial stress, every holiday disaster somehow traced back to me. When my sister Sarah's relationships failed, it was because I gave her bad advice. When my parents fought about money, it was because they spent too much helping me through college. When family gatherings turned tense, I was expected to smooth things over, apologize for existing, and make everyone else comfortable. The psychology of scapegoating runs deeper than most people realize. According to family therapy research, toxic families need someone to blame for their dysfunction, and they'll unconsciously choose the most empathetic member, the one who'll absorb the criticism without fighting back. That was me. I was raised to believe that keeping peace meant accepting blame, that love meant sacrifice without reciprocation, that family loyalty required me to be smaller so others could feel bigger. Sarah was the golden child, 3 years younger, but somehow always ahead in my parents' eyes. When she dropped out of college twice, they called it finding herself. When I graduated with honors, they worried I was too focused on achievements. When she moved back home at 25, after another failed business venture, they welcomed her with open arms. When I visited once a month with groceries and help around the house, they commented that I didn't call enough. The warning signs were everywhere, but I'd been conditioned to ignore them. During family dinners, conversations would stop when I entered the room, then resume in whispers. My parents would discuss major family decisions with Sarah, but tell me after everything was decided. When relatives visited, I'd overhear comparisons that never favored me. "Sarah's so creative and free-spirited," they'd say. "Jennifer's just so intense." What I didn't understand then was the systematic nature of emotional manipulation. Narcissistic family systems require a scapegoat to function, someone who'll carry the shame and blame that everyone else refuses to own. I was selected for this role not because I was worse than my sister, but because I was stronger. I could handle the criticism. I would keep coming back. I would keep trying to earn love that was never meant to be freely given. The financial manipulation was subtle but constant. My parents would ask for help with bills, then spend money on expensive gifts for Sarah. When I questioned this once, they accused me of being selfish and keeping track of money within family. They'd plan family vacations without consulting me, then expect me to contribute equally while giving me the smallest room or the couch. When Sarah needed a car, they asked me to co-sign because Jennifer's so responsible with credit. When the payments became difficult, somehow it was my fault for not monitoring her spending. The emotional patterns were even more damaging. Every family crisis required my immediate attention and problem-solving skills. When Sarah got arrested for a DUI, I was called at 2 a.m. to handle bail and find a lawyer. When my father had health scares, I was expected to coordinate medical appointments and insurance claims. When my mother felt overwhelmed, I was the shoulder she cried on about how difficult Sarah was to manage. But when I needed support during my own challenges, a job loss, a relationship ending, health issues, the response was always that I was strong enough to handle it alone. The isolation tactics were perhaps the most insidious. Slowly, over years, I was excluded from inside jokes, side conversations, and spontaneous family plans. I'd arrive at gatherings to find that everyone already knew information I hadn't been told. I'd be the last to know about family news, often learning about major events through social media or casual mentions weeks later. When I expressed hurt about being left out, they'd say I was being too sensitive or making everything about me. Christmas was always the worst. While Sarah received thoughtful, expensive gifts, chosen specifically for her interests, my presents felt like afterthoughts, generic gift cards or items clearly purchased last minute. The family photos were carefully arranged with Sarah prominently featured, while I was positioned on the edges, often partially cut off. When I looked at our family albums years later, I realized I'd been systematically erased from the visual narrative of our family history. The gaslighting was constant and sophisticated. When I'd bring up hurtful incidents, they'd claim they never happened or that I was remembering wrong. When I'd express pain about their treatment, they'd accuse me of being dramatic or ungrateful. My legitimate concerns were reframed as character flaws. My emotional responses to their behavior were evidence of my instability, not natural reactions to being consistently mistreated. But I kept trying. I kept believing that if I just loved them harder, helped them more, asked for less, I could earn the place in the family that felt rightfully mine. I attended every gathering, remembered every birthday, provided emotional support during every crisis. I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who'd drop everything to help. And I told myself this was love, this was family, this was normal. The breaking point had been building for months. Sarah had moved back home again after her latest relationship ended, and the house felt smaller somehow, filled with her drama and my parents' anxious energy around managing her moods. I'd been helping with groceries, picking up prescription medications for my mother's chronic pain, and listening to hours of complaints about Sarah's behavior. Yet whenever I suggested that maybe Sarah needed professional help or clearer boundaries, I was accused of being unsupportive or jealous. That Tuesday evening started like any other family dinner. I'd brought Thai food from everyone's favorite restaurant, hoping to create a peaceful atmosphere. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by Sarah's dramatic sighs and eye rolls whenever anyone addressed me directly. My parents seemed nervous, exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. The tension was thick enough to cut, but I kept trying to lighten the mood, asking about their week, sharing funny stories from work, pretending not to notice the undercurrent of hostility. Then Sarah exploded. It started with a comment about the restaurant choice. Apparently, she'd wanted Italian food, though no one had mentioned this to me. Her voice escalated quickly, words tumbling out in an increasingly vicious stream about how I always made decisions without considering anyone else, how I thought I was so much better than the rest of them, how everything was always about what Jennifer wanted. "You think you're so perfect," she screamed, standing up so abruptly her chair fell backward. "Always showing up here with your helpful little gestures, acting like you're saving us all. But you know what? You're the problem. You've always been the problem." I sat frozen, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my sister's face contort with years of stored resentment. My parents didn't move to stop her, didn't tell her to lower her voice or calm down. They sat watching like spectators at a show they'd been waiting to see. Every relationship I've ever had, you've somehow managed to ruin. Every job opportunity, every chance at happiness, You're there in the background, being so goddamn perfect that everyone else looks bad in comparison. Do you know what it's like, growing up with someone who makes you feel worthless just by existing? The words hit me like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they revealed the depth of hatred that had been brewing beneath our family's surface politeness. This wasn't a momentary outburst. This was years of carefully nurtured resentment finally finding its voice. "Why don't you just disappear?" she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Our whole family would be so much happier if you would just go away. Stop pretending to care about us. Stop trying to fix everything. Stop existing in our space like you belong here." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to say something, anything, to defend me, or at least tell Sarah she'd gone too far. Instead, my father cleared his throat uncomfortably, and my mother nodded slowly, as if Sarah had finally said what they'd all been thinking. "She's not wrong, Jennifer," my mother said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "You do have a way of overwhelming situations. Maybe some space would be good for everyone." The world tilted. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't draw a full breath. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd claimed to love me unconditionally, who'd told me family was everything. And they were sitting at this table, in this house, filled with my contributions and care, agreeing that their lives would be better without me in them. I set my fork down carefully, my hands surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. No dramatic exit, no tears, no defending myself against accusations that weren't really about me anyway. I simply stood up, walked to the front closet, and gathered my jacket and purse. "Jennifer, don't be so dramatic," my father called after me, but there was relief in his voice, not concern. I turned back once at the doorway, looking at the three of them sitting around the table, with takeout containers and the wreckage of 28 years of my trying to belong. "I'm not being dramatic," I said calmly. "I'm listening." The drive to my apartment passed in a strange, crystalline clarity. Every traffic light, every turn, every familiar landmark felt significant, like I was seeing my neighborhood for the first time. My phone rang twice, Sarah calling, probably to continue the attack or offer some hollow apology. But I declined both calls. The silence in my car felt sacred, the first honest silence I'd experienced in years. At home, I sat on my couch in the dark, still wearing my jacket, processing what had just happened. They'd actually said it. After years of implications and subtle rejections, they'd finally told me the truth. They didn't want me in their lives. The family I'd spent nearly 3 decades trying to serve and please and fix had just fired me from my position as their emotional caretaker and designated problem. The relief that washed over me was unexpected and profound. No more walking on eggshells around Sarah's moods. No more pretending my parents' criticisms were loving guidance. No more sacrificing my weekends and emotional energy for people who saw my presence as a burden rather than a gift. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't owe anyone anything. I turned off my phone and went to bed, sleeping more deeply than I had in months. The next morning brought a peculiar kind of freedom. No obligations, no family group chat demanding my attention, no guilt about not calling to check on everyone. I made coffee in my quiet kitchen, watched the sunrise through my windows, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Day 2 of my disappearance was deliberately ordinary. I worked my normal schedule, met a friend for lunch, went to a yoga class I'd been meaning to try. My phone stayed off, creating a blessed buffer between me and whatever emotional chaos might be unfolding in my former family system. I wasn't hiding. I was simply existing without their constant need for my emotional labor. By the third day, I realized I wasn't missing them the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of having a loving family, the hope that things could be different, the fantasy of belonging somewhere. But I didn't miss the actual experience of being with them, the tension, the criticism, the feeling of never being quite right or enough. This absence felt less like loss and more like recovery. I spent the evening organizing my apartment, a space that was entirely mine, filled with things I'd chosen, decorated according to my taste, without anyone's commentary or correction. Every corner reflected my personality without apology or compromise. This was what belonging felt like, not fighting for acceptance, but creating a space where acceptance wasn't required because you were already home. My friend Maya stopped by with dinner that night, and for the first time I told someone the full story of my family dynamics. Speaking the truth out loud, watching her face register shock and concern, helped me understand how normalized the dysfunction had become in my mind. "Jennifer," she said carefully, "that's not how families are supposed to treat each other. That's emotional abuse." The word hung in the air between us. Abuse. I'd never applied that term to my family situation because there was no physical violence, no screaming matches that left visible bruises. But emotional abuse was exactly what it was. Systematic undermining, deliberate exclusion, manipulation disguised as love, criticism presented as concern. I'd been conditioned to accept treatment that I'd never tolerate from friends, romantic partners, or colleagues. That night, as I prepared for my 4th day of voluntary absence from their lives, I made a decision. I wouldn't just disappear as they'd demanded. I would take control of the narrative. If they wanted space from me, they could have it, on my terms, for as long as I decided. The girl who'd spent her life trying to earn love from people who'd already decided she wasn't worth it was gone. What remained was a woman who finally understood her worth wasn't determined by their approval. I plugged my phone in to charge, knowing that when I turned it on, there would be messages. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their disapproval or desperate for their attention. I was curious about what happened to a family when their scapegoat finally stopped playing the role they'd assigned her. The power had shifted, and I was ready to see what came next. When I finally turned my phone back on after 3 days of deliberate silence, the screen lit up like a Christmas tree. 14 missed calls, 37 text messages, and 12 voicemails, all time-stamped within the past 18 hours. The desperation was palpable even through the digital interface. The progression of calls told a story more revealing than any family therapy session could have uncovered. It started with my mother, 3 calls between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., her contact photo appearing with increasing frequency as panic set in. The voicemails began angry and demanding, her voice sharp with the authority she'd always wielded over me. "Jennifer, this is ridiculous. Call me back immediately. We need to talk about your behavior the other night. You can't just storm out like a child and ignore your family." Her tone carried the familiar edge of someone accustomed to immediate compliance, someone who'd never questioned whether her demands would be met. By the second voicemail, recorded just 2 hours later, cracks appeared in her confidence. "Jennifer, I'm starting to worry. Please just call and let us know you're okay. We can work this out like adults." The shift from anger to concern was telling. My absence was already disrupting their comfortable dynamic. The third message revealed the real issue. "Your father thinks maybe we should call the police. This isn't like you to just disappear without telling anyone where you're going." Sarah's worried sick. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah, who'd screamed at me to disappear, was now worried about my disappearance. The cognitive dissonance was stunning, but not surprising. Toxic family systems rely on their scapegoat being available for abuse, not actually gone. My father's calls came next, 4 attempts between 9 a.m. and noon. His voicemails carried a different tone, confusion mixed with growing panic. Dad had always been the passive observer in our family drama, neither defending me nor actively participating in my persecution. His messages revealed how little he understood about the dynamics he'd enabled for decades. "Jenny, sweetheart, your mother's beside herself. I don't really understand what happened the other night, but surely we can sit down and talk this through. Family's family, right? Call your old dad back." His use of my childhood nickname felt like emotional manipulation, an attempt to regress me back to the compliant daughter who'd accept any treatment if it was delivered with enough false warmth. The second call from him was more direct. "Jennifer, this is getting out of hand. I need you to call me back today. Your mother can't sleep, and frankly, I'm starting to get worried too. We may have said some things we didn't mean, but that's no reason to punish the whole family." Punish the whole family. The language was revealing. My absence wasn't being seen as self-protection or boundary setting. It was being framed as punishment, as if my existence in their lives was a service I was withholding rather than a gift I was reconsidering. But it was Sarah's calls that truly exposed the depth of their dysfunction. 8 attempts throughout the day, her desperation escalating with each unanswered ring. The progression of her voicemails read like a psychological case study in narcissistic injury. The first message was defiant. "Jen, stop being such a drama queen. I said what I said, and I meant it, but that doesn't mean you get to disappear and make everyone worry about you. That's so typical. Making everything about you even when you're not here." 2 hours later, the tone shifted. "Okay, look, maybe I was a little harsh the other night. I was stressed about work and took it out on you. Can you please just call me back so Mom and Dad stop freaking out? This is affecting everyone. By the 4th message, panic had fully set in. "Jennifer, please, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean what I said. I was just, I don't know, I was angry about other stuff, and you were there and I took it out on you. That's not fair. Please just come home so we can talk." The final voicemail from Sarah, recorded at 11 p.m. the previous night, was the most revealing. "I keep thinking about what I said, and I didn't mean it. I don't want you to disappear. I don't know why I said that. I think I'm jealous of you, and I hate feeling that way. And sometimes when I'm around you, I just feel so small. But that's not your fault. I know that's not your fault. Please call me back. I need to know you're okay." There it was, the confession I'd waited 28 years to hear. Sarah's rage wasn't about anything I'd done wrong. It was about her own feelings of inadequacy feelings she'd been projecting onto me for decades, while our parents enabled and encouraged the dynamic. The golden child facade was cracking, revealing the insecurity and self-hatred that had always driven her attacks on me. The text messages painted an even clearer picture of their desperation. My mother's texts evolved from commanding, "Call me now," to pleading, "Please just let us know you're safe," to bargaining, "We can work this out if you just come home." My father's messages were shorter but more frequent, each one a little more panicked than the last. Sarah's texts were the most volatile, swinging between anger, apology, and manipulation within the span of hours. "You're really going to let Mom make herself sick over this?" Followed by, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Followed by, "This is so selfish even for you." Followed by, "Please don't abandon us." The word abandon struck me. They'd spent years making me feel unwanted, unwelcome, and unnecessary. But now my absence was abandonment. The double standard was breathtaking in its clarity. I was supposed to absorb their abuse without complaint, but remain available for their comfort without expectation of reciprocity. Reading through all the messages, I felt something I'd never experienced in relation to my family: power. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding the cards. They needed something from me: my presence, my forgiveness, my return to the role of family scapegoat. And I had the choice whether or not to give it to them. The realization was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I'd spent so many years believing I needed them more than they needed me, that I was lucky they tolerated my presence at all. But 3 days of my absence had reduced them to panic and desperation. They weren't relieved by my disappearance. They were destabilized by it. I thought about calling them back, falling into the familiar pattern of soothing their anxiety and minimizing my own hurt. The muscle memory of people-pleasing was strong, ingrained by decades of conditioning. But something had shifted during my 3 days of silence. I'd tasted freedom from their emotional chaos, and I wasn't ready to give it up. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I took my time. I made coffee, sat in my sunny kitchen, and really considered my options. I didn't owe them an immediate response. I didn't owe them my comfort or my compliance. For the first time in my adult life, I could choose how and when to engage with my family based on what felt right for me, not what they demanded from me. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that I almost didn't recognize the family described in those frantic messages. Where was the confident authority my mother usually wielded? Where was Sarah's casual cruelty, her assumption that she could say anything to me without consequences? Where was my father's passive dismissal of my feelings and needs? They were gone, replaced by 3 people who suddenly understood that they'd been taking something for granted: my presence, my availability, my willingness to absorb their dysfunction without complaint. My absence had revealed the extent to which their family system depended on my participation in my own mistreatment. I spent the morning researching family scapegoat dynamics online, finally putting clinical terms to experiences I'd lived but never fully understood. The patterns were textbook: the designated patient who carries the family's shame, the emotional caretaker who manages everyone else's feelings while neglecting their own, the lightning rod who absorbs conflict so others can avoid addressing their own issues. Every article I read felt like looking in a mirror: the scapegoat who believes they're the problem, The family that needs someone to blame for their dysfunction. The cycle that continues until the scapegoat either breaks completely or breaks free. I was at that crucial junction, and for the first time, I had the clarity to choose my own path forward. By afternoon, I'd made my decision. I would respond to their crisis, but on my terms and timeline. I wouldn't be the daughter who came running at the first sign of their distress. I wouldn't be the sister who apologized for existing. I wouldn't be the family member who sacrificed her dignity for the illusion of belonging. I crafted a single text message and sent it to the family group chat. I'm safe. I need space to process what happened. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk. Then I turned my phone off again. The next week passed in a strange, suspended reality. I went to work, met friends for dinner, took long walks in my neighborhood, and slowly began to understand what my life looked like without the constant background noise of family drama. The absence of their chaos created space for me to hear my own thoughts, feel my own feelings, and make decisions based on my own needs rather than their expectations. Maya checked on me daily, bringing groceries and offering a listening ear when I needed to process the magnitude of what was happening. You know, she said one evening as we shared takeout in my peaceful apartment, I've known you for 5 years, and this is the first time I've seen you truly relaxed. You didn't even realize how much stress you were carrying. She was right. The tension I'd normalized as part of family relationships was gone, replaced by a calm I'd forgotten was possible. I slept better, ate without the knot of anxiety that usually accompanied family interactions, and found myself laughing more easily. The contrast was stark enough to make me question whether I'd ever actually enjoyed spending time with my family, or if I'd just been enduring it out of obligation. After 10 days of silence, I finally felt ready to engage. But I wouldn't be meeting them on their terms, in their space, under their rules. I would control the when, where, and how of our reunion. The daughter who'd spent her life accommodating their preferences was gone. What remained was a woman who understood her worth and was prepared to defend it. I turned my phone back on to find 43 new messages and 27 missed calls. The desperation had only intensified during my extended absence. My mother's texts had progressed from anger to panic to what looked like genuine fear. Sarah's messages swung wildly between apology and rage, sometimes within the same conversation thread. My father's communications had become increasingly paternal and concerned, as if I were a teenager who'd missed curfew rather than an adult woman making autonomous decisions about toxic relationships. The voicemails told an even more revealing story. My mother's voice had taken on a quality I'd never heard before: vulnerability, uncertainty, even fear. Jennifer, please. I don't understand what's happening. This isn't who we are as a family. We love you. We need you. Please come home. The woman who'd spent years criticizing my every choice was now begging for my return. Sarah's final voicemail was a sobbing confession that laid bare the jealousy and inadequacy she'd been projecting onto me for decades. I've been thinking about everything I said, and I realize I've been horrible to you. Not just that night, but for years. I think I blamed you for everything I couldn't fix about myself. You were always so together, so capable, so good. And I felt like such a mess next to you. But that's my problem, not yours. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Reading through all their messages, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and clarity. These people had shaped my entire understanding of family, love, and self-worth. Their opinions had carried more weight than my own for most of my life. And now, seeing them reduced to panic by my absence, I understood how much power I'd been giving away. But I also understood something else. Their desperation wasn't necessarily about love. It was about control, about maintaining a system that served their needs at my expense. They weren't panicking because they missed me as a person. They were panicking because they'd lost their designated problem solver, emotion manager, and scapegoat. That realization crystallized my resolve. When I finally responded to their crisis, it wouldn't be as the grateful daughter returning to beg forgiveness for asserting her boundaries. It would be as a woman who understood her value and was prepared to negotiate the terms of any future relationship from a position of strength. I composed a message that took me 3 hours to write and rewrite. I've received your messages. I'm ready to meet and discuss our family dynamic, but it will be on neutral ground with specific conditions. If you want me in your lives, some things need to change permanently. Let me know if you're willing to have that conversation. Within 5 minutes, my phone was ringing. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in my life, I let it go to voicemail. I would engage with them again, but it would be when I chose, how I chose, and only if they were willing to meet me as an equal rather than as their designated emotional caretaker. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The question now was whether they were capable of relating to me as a person worthy of respect rather than as a function in their dysfunctional system. Either way, I was no longer willing to disappear to make them comfortable. If they wanted me in their lives, they would have to learn to make space for me as I actually was, not as they needed me to be. The girl who'd believed she had to earn love through service and sacrifice was gone. What remained was a woman who understood that real love didn't require her to make herself smaller so others could feel bigger. And for the first time in 28 years, that felt like enough.